basis. And this is kind of at odds with the 24/7 data availability that we've come to get used to in Web 2, where apps have 24/7 access to our information. And so I think that, this is a really wonderful opportunity, as I mentioned, for us to explore, like, what are the relative merits of these tools based on the needs that we have as humans, and how do we find that spectrum of use cases, Vitalik, as you suggested earlier, where some are more optimal than others, and we have a pretty good understanding of what we think those first externalities are going to be.
So I think, first of all, I definitely totally sympathize with the goal of technology neutrality. Like, I think, if someone hates or just does not want to use Ethereum, or then, they should not be forced to use it in order to be part of, the, identity web of the future. I think, they should totally be able to be, use Solana. If you're David Gerard, then you should totally be free to kind of not bother with a blockchain at all and just, have your open ID and let Google or Facebook run your identity. I think if someone wants to do that, that's fine too. I do think that it is possible to create standards that cover that. I know that, like, for example, Juan from Filecoin, right? Like, he is, in IPFS, like, there's a lot of work that's been done, and, being able to kind of support multiple types of hash functions and, like, support multiple algorithms for pretty much everything, and creating kind of these data standards that can actually do that. And I think it should, totally be possible. I mean, I don't, I'm not deep enough in the verifiable credential community to know maybe this already has been done. But to make it so that, like, you can have an Ethereum account that interfaces with the system, or a Solana account, or
Yes,
a
Vitalik,
Google
you can. We can. We
Okay.
can, sorry to jump in. We can do that. We can use a verifiable credential to bidirectionally bind together our Ethereum address with our Bitcoin address, with our Solana address. I can send a credential signed by my Ethereum address to someone else's address that is a Bitcoin address or a Solana address, and we can be on the same page already. So I would love to explore this more with you.
Okay, actually, so one kind of detailed question there. Let's say, like, I want my, let's, I'll jump to another team just for fun. Let's say I'm a Solana maxi and I want my Solana address to be my root, right? So with basically, does the system give the possibility for me to say the Solana address is my root, and the Solana address is the thing that has the right to kind of reset my Ethereum address and my Bitcoin address and the address and the public key that I use to send all the other attestations?
So we are currently working on that approach, starting with Ethereum keys at Disco. But our friends over at Encore in the Solana ecosystem are thinking about what that means for their world. So we'll keep you posted on what those discoveries look like. But we think, it's an exciting opportunity to become your first personal, you are your own multi-sig. You are your personal API. And so that means incorporating multiple facets of your personhood.
So I was trying to keep up with that, and so I think what you guys were talking about, if with the root conversation, is that with these off-chain verifiable credentials, off-chain decentralized identifiers, and I just spun up my Disco data loot bag yesterday. But does that mean that, Evan, like, Disco is like opinionated, as in, like, Disco's home is Ethereum, even though it can link to other Ethereum addresses? Is that the conversation that you guys are having?
So we are building, starting in the Ethereum ecosystem, because that is where we have the most experience and we see the most exciting opportunities, of course. And so as we explore the relationships that people have between different keys, we're going to figure out, what does it look like? Is it hierarchical? Right now, based on the decentralized identifier spec, not especially, but identity is an emergent thing. And so I think based on the way that people start to interact, deliberately engaging multiple chains at once, or their physical space with their on-chain activities, or even Web 2 activities, we'll start to see more of this structure emerge. So at Disco, the very first thing that we're doing is enabling everybody to create decentralized identifiers out of their existing Ethereum addresses, so they can get so they can use their existing MetaMask keys to sign off-chain data in the form of verifiable credentials that they can write about themselves, they can send to their friends, they can receive from the DAOs in which they are members, like Boys Club or SheFi, DAOs and Syndicate and Seed Club as well in the future. And so we are starting off with the Ethereum ecosystem because, as Vitalik noted earlier, we are hitting a ceiling of fun that we can have together when we're limited to on-chain data.
And so, Vitalik, what can you illustrate or illuminate the importance of trying to have an agnostic technology that, like, if somebody wants to have what I think you guys called the root not be Ethereum if Ethereum isn't your main chain of choice. Why is that an important choice for users?
I mean, I think it is looking like we're going to be in a world where different users are kind of primarily homed on one particular chain, and I think that's totally fine. And in some cases, the chains that people use might even end up changing. So I'd say, in general, like, if you have a standard of this type that ends up kind of enshrining one particular chain, then like that both I mean, obviously it entrenches that that standard further in that chain's ecosystem, but it does also kind of limit the social scalability of it, which I think is from that point of view something that's totally fair.
Evan, is this technology that what you're building at Disco, is this like agnostic from even like necessarily the cryptocurrency world? I know it will always use cryptography, but like, is this something that like the Web 2 world can leverage?
Absolutely, yes. So in the same way that we can create a decentralized identifier out of our Ethereum address, we could also create one out of a PGP key, an email address, a website. And so our ability to show up with the various facets that make us us, and connect them together is one thing, right? Which names are we using for ourselves? Where do they come from? But our ability to collect metadata around all those different names, off-chain, non-financial metadata in the form of credentials describing any of those addresses, this has very little to do with, or natively has very little to do with financial interactions. The security of data in this particular form is secured by cryptography, as you note. And so, though off-chain credentials can support the integrity and transparency and complexity of financial interactions, there is nothing inherently financial about them. So when I send a verifiable credential to you, I don't pay any fees or anything, but because it's a piece of data, it's got to be stored somewhere. So we're sort of changing the process of where cost falls in that communication.
Mm-hmm. So I have two last questions before I run out of them. And so if there's any last subjects floating around in your respective brains, do bring them up. But my last question is about like a superset versus a subset of these different like form factors. And what I mean by that is, and Vitalik, correct me if I'm wrong, but like this isn't like soulbound NFTs versus off-chain identifiers. Like my understanding for this is that like a soulbound NFT is like a smaller subset of just like verifiable credentials and decentralized identifiers at large, right? Where you have a verifiable credential, and then if you imbue that into an NFT on a blockchain and make that NFT non-transferable, then you get a soulbound NFT. Vitalik, would you agree with that description?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's like important to distinguish between like verifiable credentials, the brand's name, kind of, and the kind of specific community that's been working around that brand name for a half a decade, versus the general concept of credentials that are verifiable. Soulbound NFTs are credentials that are verifiable. But on the other, a soulbound NFT is also a brand name, right? Because soulbound NFTs, by some definitions, they're not even tokens. So it's like I think once you kind of go beyond the kind of like the specific kind of categories that exist in people's heads and like start thinking about properties, like you can totally unlock that entire space in the middle, right? And like I think just even to save gas, it does totally make sense in a lot of cases to, make popes be off-chain in a lot of contexts, for example, right? Like, if you have a pope issuer, then like they can save gas by just issuing an entire tree of popes and just sticking the root on chain, and then giving every individual participant the Merkle branch, right? And, if you trust the pope issuer to issue a legitimate pope, then, you're going to trust the pope issuer for data availability anyway, so that's fine, right? So that already kind of is an opportunity to save a whole bunch of gas. Though, you do still kind of retain some properties of a blockchain, like, you've, like, just for example, you retain this kind of hard kind of like proof that says that like if your Merkle branch has length 10, then you can prove that a maximum of 1024 of them have been issued, right? And you can only do that sort of thing if you actually have Merkle branches going into a particular root and you have like that particular root committed on chain. So there's definitely is this kind of long spectrum of how much chaining are you doing, and how many more of these extra guarantees that you're getting. And I do think that different use cases are going to want different things along that spectrum, which I think is totally fine. I think another thing that's probably worth stressing is that I think one of the differences between cryptography and social systems is that a social system does not survive first contact with reality, right? Like the only way to make social systems that are sane just is going to have to involve like some degree of being iterative and like kind of setting it out there, seeing how people interact with it, and then kind of using those experiences as feedback into the next version, right? Like I think we saw a lot of that with Gitcoin, for example, and the Gitcoin grants rounds, and how they've kind of matured from the very kind of early versions that we saw during like rounds 1 to 3 into the very mature community that we see today. And so I think ultimately like the people that probably both can and will kind of make the biggest difference here probably are not even just going to be people kind of passively thinking about this. It actually will be people who wants to issue specific pokes for a particular purpose, or people who wants to issue soul-bound airdrops and have particular needs for what kinds of properties that they're trying to filter for, or people who wants to let's say make some social media platform that has like some built-in form of ZK negative reputation and like trying to get privacy and accountability at the same time. So I think the use cases themselves are going to kind of like matter a lot, and so in some ways I even think that kind of the missing fourth person in this chat might even be someone from kind of one of these like applications that's actually been using their credentials or pokes or proof humanity. But I'm very hopeful that I think those people are aware of the discussion, they're part of the discussion, and I think we're going to have lots of opportunities to talk and figure it out.
Yeah, on the weekly rollup that Ryan and I recorded yesterday, it came out today. For the people that are listening to this coming Wednesday, it was last Friday. There was a question from the nation that we answered, which is like, what is the big next thing that is coming to the world of crypto? And Ryan and I both independently came up with the same answer, which is more or less the conversation that we're having right now, which is identity. And how can we get more expressive identity as a utility inside of the crypto ecosystem? And so I think this conversation, Vitalik, is going to be very much ongoing as it progresses in pure crypto fashion, which is in all directions at once. Evan, any comments or topics you want to bring up before I ask my last question?
David, to the point of all directions at once, I think we have this very unique opportunity to bring a ton of camps together that haven't yet been before. We have a way to use our Ethereum addresses to communicate globally, off-chain, private, trustless reputation. And today, 5-year-old students are accruing verifiable credentials around their decentralized identifiers as they learn with the Lego Foundation, as well as students at Harvard, which co-founded the Digital Credentials Consortium, which makes it easy for universities to issue verifiable credentials for academic achievements. So from 5-year-olds to cryptography PhDs at Harvard, we have an incredible community of folks who we can reach out to with this conversation, who we can bring into the fold, who we can onboard to their first MetaMask addresses, and we can invite them to the table as we continue this.
So to put this just in really just concrete language, and I know like whether or not it should be a credential should be off-chain and have the data off-chain, or if it should be a soul-bound on-chain NFT, is definitely going to depend on the facts and circumstances of the actual context of whatever we're talking about. But I'll bring up which is like one very simple one, which is like my college degree. So the question is, what is the best like form factor for like a university higher education degree? And so what a degree is, it's a piece of paper that is basically a credential of being proficient in a specific domain of knowledge. So like when Harvard enters the metaverse, what's like the most logical form factor for them to issue credentials? Evan, I'll throw that one to you.
So I feel like I kind of, blew up the lead a little bit there because I realized I just mentioned Harvard to work with verifiable credentials. But if we were to take a step back, pretend that we don't know that, I think soulbound tokens are not as flexible and